Everyone, it's Adam Tracy again, and I don't often talk about news, right? Unless it relates to like regulation and stuff like that. And I really kind of have an opinion piece, but you've heard a lot about Operation Chokepoint and how it's impacted the crypto industry. And this sort of came, I guess, to light in the media sense from Joe Rogan's podcast, where Mark Andreessen discussed how some fairly significant VC and startup persons were debanked, right? And if you've been in crypto long enough, like either you've been debanked or you know somebody who has, and in for what I do, like I hear about it all the time, right? And really the biggest challenge with so many things crypto is finding access to the traditional financial system, whether it be banking, payment processing, money transfer, you name it. And it's become progressively harder, such that, when I talk about licensing and stuff like that, getting the license typically isn't the hardest part. It is actually getting the connectivity to payment rails and the like that is the hardest part. So just as a background, Operation Chokepoint started under the Obama administration, and in version 1.0, it was designed to curb access to banking and payment processing for like marijuana dispensaries, gun stores, and the like. And banks, who are routinely audited and subject to a slew of regulators, were introduced to something called reputational risk, and that became part of their audit. And what the FDIC and OCC came up with was this reputation component, which affected your score, right? Like your audit score and your outward ability to continue banking operations. And what they did with this reputational risk was it basically said, well, if you're dealing with dispensaries, gun shops, adult industry, stuff like that, that score goes down. And even though you may be a wildly solvent bank, the audit and those numbers presented, which are publicly available, would seemingly make you appear to be, your bank appear to be less solvent than what it in fact was. So fast forward to 2008 or 2020 rather, Operation Chokepoint 1.0, it goes away. Operation Chokepoint 2.0 comes into play, and the focus is now crypto, right? And you have these same reputational risk quotients, and then you see this overwhelming debanking of not only companies, right, irrespective of the size, right, which you would presume would be in the best interest of the bank, to just individuals who are engaged in everything from OTC trading, and even people who just maybe trade every so often on Coinbase and then, do a transfer. Then all of a sudden the bank sees the transfer from Coinbase where you sold some crypto because you needed money for Christmas or whatever the case may be. And boom, you don't have a bank, right? And when you get a bank account shut down, well, what happens? You get reported to early warning, as I've talked about Zelle, or check systems, and now you have a mark, just like not paying a credit card on time, that says, I was, debanked for what they call account abuse, right? Which really is just a moniker for, among other things, primarily cryptocurrency. So there's been a lot of talk about like what recourse do you have, right? And it's very unclear. And what had happened in the initial Chokepoint 1.0, some dispensaries got together and did in fact attempt to redress the issue, but what had happened was they dropped it because Operation Chokepoint 1.0 was canceled. So there's minimal like evidence, empirical evidence, legal evidence that you could in fact find redress for this. But there's an interesting argument that relates to due process. And like I am by no stretch of the imagination some sort of constitutional scholar. I think I slept through that part during school. But there's a case, and from the 70s in Wisconsin, and this draws a perfect parallel, right? And I think this is the great takeaway, where a local sheriff in town had created this law that said, we don't want this one liquor store in this little woodsy town to sell liquor to people we deem to have like drinking problems, right? And so what they did was they posted pictures pursuant to this regulation of the individuals like outside the liquor store and the inside the liquor store, and it basically said you cannot sell to these people. Well, that is, in this very roundabout sort of way, this reputational due process violation, right? Because you have a right to do that and you're doing something legal, but the government has somehow impugned your reputation such that you can't continue to engage in that legal activity. So drawing the comparison here to date with crypto companies, what you have is, by all accounts, companies that are operating legally, because even before Operation Chokepoint 2.0, you almost always had to be an MSB or carry some sort of license to get a bank account. So by all measures, they're acting in accordance with the law because they've registered as MSBs. They're doing KYC, right? All these things. But now the government is depriving them of property, their banking, their ability to bank, their ability to carry on operations in some case, because what they've said is, well, we don't like you. And we have a reputational interest, and all the banks are obviously going to fall in line, as they did, because of not only the prospect of a negative audit, but the prospect of what exactly happened to Signature Bank, Silicon Valley, all of them, where really healthy banks, right, were shut down because of their exposure to crypto, when, like in the case of Signature, it was actually very minimal. It was exceedingly minimal. But the OCC has the ability to shut you down at any time for an impending bank failure. So we are all, like in the crypto sense, we're all the drunks in that little Wisconsin town back in the 70s, right? And we're saying, hey, listen, we want a bank. We're allowed to do everything we want with crypto. We're licensed if we have to be. We're all that. But the government's saying, no, you can't. But they're going to pressure the liquor store to not sell to you, right? And they're just pressuring the banks to not offer you services because they perceive you to be some sort of risk, even though you legally haven't done anything wrong. So that's just my rant. You see law firms gearing up and talking about lawsuits and all this kind of stuff, and I encourage people to find them, right, and investigate it. And I caution it by saying nothing's been ever proven to work, and it's sort of this odd comparison that I just even relied upon. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts of why it happened and what people are trying to attempt to remake and undo, right? So Operation Chokepoint, my one opinion news piece for the year, the end of the year. If you have questions, adam@adamtracy.io. Talk to you next time. Cheers.